Hello, everyone. I'm Joe Tucker. We just got finished talking about Venezuela with two members of the Academy on the Academy's official podcast, The Rule of Law, The Academy Speaks. We're going to continue on with the special episode with two people with intimate knowledge of what's going on in Venezuela, as well as some of the actions that have happened there that have impacted people in Venezuela. I have my good friend, Randy Smith, who's a professor emeritus at the University of Missouri, and Patricia Marcano, who is in exile from Venezuela. She is an investigative reporter, and she is currently teaching at the Ohio University. Welcome, guys.
Thank you very much, Joe. Good to be here.
Thank
Good.
you, Joe, for
Thank
having me.
Patricia, it's always good seeing you. I haven't seen you in a while. Why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about you, Patricia, and you being in exile from Venezuela?
Well, I'm in exile here in the US because of my job in Venezuela as an investigative journalist. I used to work in digital media. The name is armando.info. So we specialize in investigative reports, and we are practically the only media in Venezuela that is doing investigative journalism. And we are covering during the last 7 years, 8 years, all the corruption around the government, the Maduro government, as well as the human rights violations and all the organized crime that is related to them.
Let me stop you for a second. I forgot in the introduction because your resume is so long, it would take up the entire time for us to discuss it. You are an award-winning investigative journalist, and I think our listeners need to know about that. And Randy, why don't you tell us how you got to meet Patricia before we go back to her?
Well, Alfred Friendly Press Partners has been in existence for about 40 plus years. And just recently, we switched our programming to focus on journalists who are in exile. And Patricia is a member of our second class, the 2025 class. And we have always had someone from Venezuela in our class. The purpose of our class is to get journalists who are in exile legally here in the United States to essentially do the work that they were trained to do for their whole life, and that's to get back into journalism in no matter whatever way possible. We're really proud of Patricia because she won the Gabo Award, which is the Pulitzer essentially in Latin America, and that was for really a decade of work that she and her colleagues did, and also for her recent graduation from Ohio University, so with a master's degree. So she's a real star, and if there's anybody who knows about Venezuela, it's her.
You're extraordinary, Patricia. Having met you and spent time with you, you're absolutely extraordinary. One of the issues that brought you to America and to be in exile was the Maduro government. What there in a prior discussion that I was having with some of the fellows, we were saying it's not necessarily bad that Maduro is there. And we talked about the constitutionality and the permissive nature of whether or not we should have done that. But what was it like living under the Maduro government as an investigative reporter?
Well, until the Maduro government, let me see, Maduro started to be president in 2013 after Hugo Chavez's death. And in that moment, he will continue the Bolivarian revolution that started with Chavez. But in reality, we started to see a more autocratic country, a more autocratic government. So since 2013 and the years after that, the government started to buy the main media, the main TV channel, the main newspapers. I was working in one of that newspaper. So that was a way in which the government started to censorship the press. At the same time, they start to limit the accessibility to the paper that the newspaper needs. So slowly, the government start to monopolize all the independent media or all the traditional media, even the television, radio, and newspapers. So that forced many of journalists like me to migrate to the online media, to digital media. So several journalists started to open the digital media in a way in which we wanted to keep doing journalism. So the reality was that slowly the government start to censorship even more. They start to approve different laws that right now makes a risk to practice the journalist on the ground. So
Patricia,
usually,
I'm going to interrupt you for a second because as I hear you talk, and this is where I'm going to get Randy in trouble now. Randy, listening to Patricia, it sounds as though there are some parallels with what the Maduro government did with the media there to what's happening here in America with the consolidation of reporting and the vetting of newspapers, whether it's and articles, whether it's like 60 Minutes or the Washington Post not supporting. Are you seeing those same parallels that some people have talked about?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Um, and it's we wonder, you wonder as these television stations, in particular, like CBS recently, are come under essentially the rule of new bosses. How credible that they're going to be in the long run. I'm worried currently right now about the future of 60 Minutes and some of the other Hallmark shows that I have, depended upon for years.
Now, Patricia, going back to you, tell us about, because I don't want people to think that what happened in Venezuela can't happen here in America. Tell us about how the slow erosion of independent media happened in Venezuela.
well, that erosion, I mean, has been in many ways. I mean, one of the smartest ways was that about buy the different media. It's like a not a traditional way to censorship. So they start to become the owner or different media. And then with different lawyers, with different laws, sorry, it's like if you publish something that the government consider is a treason or is a speech, hate speech, you can go into jail just for that. So we start to see like we need to be aware and be care about what we are publishing because you don't know which kind of report can be considered and a threat for the government. So at the same time, we started to see how when we publish investigations related to corruption, the people involved in that situation that we have the proof start to law to sue different journalists. So we have the risk to go into jail for more than 15 years for this kind of argument that you are publishing wrong information, but the reality is that it's very reliable information. And part of that is because all the 5 branches that we have in Venezuela are under the control of the same government, the same political party. So we don't have independence. So if you go to with the prosecutor cause, you know that they are allied with the government. So you won't have a independent process in the legal system.
Randy, have you seen parallels in American history where journalists were being censored like what we have seen in Venezuela?
Well, it doesn't have to go back very far. I mean, when I came into this profession in the 70s, early 70s, actually, under Richard Nixon, he had an enemies list, and a lot of that included media professionals, and there was a lot of pressure being applied on people who were reporting. And frankly, it took a lot of guts to do what Woodward and Bernstein did at the Washington Post, exposing Watergate.
Patricia, what type of investigations were you reporting on that got you in trouble and caused you to go into exile from your country?
Well, most of them has been about corruption. One is about how the sons of Celia Flores, that is the wife of Nicolas Maduro, how these sons that has been under investigation here in the US bought all the 14 houses in a same street in a particular area in Caracas, and showing how these people suddenly start to buy these different houses, like threaten the original owners.
And
And
these were Maduro's sons?
The stepsons of Maduro.
Yes.
And another investigation was about the poor quality of the powder milk that the government was imported to give to the poor people in Venezuela in a subsidiary program of food. And we developed, we show that this powder milk that the government was buying in Mexico was really poor quality. We did a chemical analysis in the main university in Caracas and in Venezuela, and did demonstrate that these products have a high levels of sodium and high levels of carbohydrate and a low levels of calcium and protein. So at the same time, the government was buying this in a high price, and they were benefiting with the overprice of these products. And the other was, the last one I can remember, is about the torture, the human rights violation that the government has been committed in the last 5 years, since 2017, when we have a massive protest during 3 months against the government, and the government just apply a brutal repression and start the torture and the human rights violations, and
Is
even
this torture
crimes
that was happening in
against
prisons?
Yes.
And how were you able to report on the torture in prisons?
Well, the torture was because I have able to talk with the family of this person that, this particular report have to try to prove how the government was applying a Nazi technique that was called sip and have, in which the government, when the government want to capture a political person that oppose the government, they start to follow their families, and they take their families into prison to press this person to go to the authorities, because if this target didn't appear, their family will be tortured. So I talked with several families because I wanted to know if this was a pattern of this was only a particular extra limitation, but we confirmed with more than 25 cases, different cases, that the government was applying these techniques just to persecuting the people that oppose the government.
Was your life in danger when you were doing this?
A bit, because we were identifying the person behind that torture, and that person is right now part of the government, is also identified as one of the main torturers by the fact-finding mission of United Nations, and is also under investigation in the International Criminal Court.
I promise you we're going to get back to Venezuela, but I wanted to ask Randy a question. Randy, in these countries where you see the suppression of free press, how has that impacted the normal citizenry? Are they impacted when we no longer have a free press in the particular countries?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, they don't know what's going on in their government, and that's the idea. Is as quickly as possible. Frankly, the press is the first light that they try to turn out, and so people don't know what's going on. Not only with the government, but with their own economy, and with gets right down to their groceries and what's happening in their neighborhoods. Um, so as a result, the only way you can get any information is through the official government channels. And of course, that is essentially, for the most part, made up lies and unreliable.
Patricia, I want to talk to you about some of the debates that have been happening here in America as well as internationally, and that is the impact of the removal of Maduro from Venezuela. In a vacuum, it doesn't sound like that is a bad thing, having him removed. Do you agree with that?
I agree with that.
What has been from you? Have you been speaking to people back home about how the country's been since he's removed?
Yes, I have been in touch with my family, of course, and my loved ones. And well, the situation was a shock, was a surprise. The attack on Saturday early morning, and I was in touch with my family. They just sent me a message telling me what is happening, happening in that moment. And the Sunday morning, the people, was a calm, like a fear calm, because it's like the people, this is true, the majority feels like the happiness to know that Maduro is no longer in the country, but at the same time, when all of Venezuela started to see that the key official of the government remains there, like the vice president, the president of the assembly, the interior minister, is like, okay, this is weird because it's true, Maduro is gone, but the dictatorship remains. And these people that were part of the country and that are now in charge of the presidency in Venezuela are radical, are the same or worse than Maduro, and they are also responsible of the crimes against humanity that they have committed in the last years. So for that reason, many Venezuelans in Venezuela didn't celebrate openly, because we learned after the 2024 election, when the opposition won and the government stole the election, they didn't recognize that they lose the election. The government increased the repression, and they started to stop the people in the streets or even in the bus, and they start to check the phones, and they start to
That's what I
check
understand, that they're now
WhatsApp and
stopping
social
people.
media. And if you see something related, in this case, after the attack, now is if they find something related to any celebration for the extraction of Maduro, they will take you in prison.
Randy, have you been getting any press reports from people on the ground in Venezuela as to what is going on there? Just from the normal citizens, and as Patricia said, they're being stopped on the buses, their phones are being checked to see if they're celebrating Maduro. Have you been getting any press reports or any intel there?
Yeah, today the vice president was sworn in as president, and at that time, 15 journalists who were covering this were detained, and eventually they were released. But it was a message to journalists on the ground that we can and will detain you. One of the journalists, 14 were released. One of the journalists was deported. We don't know the names of all the journalists. The other thing that I've been hearing a lot is that while there is this eerie calm of fear right now, the country is very close to running out of cash. And while there are food and other resources on the shelves right now, that may not last that long because of the embargo. And if there is a total collapse, one of the first important things you're probably going to see is a lot of people heading to the borders to escape. It is a porous border, and
Me
it's,
escaping over to Colombia.
yeah, or elsewhere.
Yeah.
And so there will be a lot of refugees and other people who, are coming with nothing. And so it's, we're right on the edge of a humanitarian crisis.
Patricia, what are you hearing from your colleagues who are reporters in Venezuela about what's happened over the past week?
Well, the situation is very scary for them because right now, just after the attacks, the government declared 19 days of emergency. And in this kind of decree, they have several articles, and one of the articles states that the security force can check and detain all the people that they confirm that were celebrating this attack. So my colleagues in this moment are most of them reporting with international journalists, like serving as sources or saving as fixers, but they are avoiding to sign with their name just for protections.
So reporters will send you information, but they don't want attribution for fear of retribution.
Exactly. Exactly. That's part of the situation. And I mean, we are aware because every day we have a different news. For instance, before this conversation, the president of the assembly says that they will release the political prisoners. So we are waiting to see if this will be true, because usually when the government release a group of political prisoners, in the next coming days, they find new people and they detain them and then take to the jail. So it's like a never stop, the machinery of the political prisoners. So let's see in this opportunity. And we have in this moment 23 journalists on jail in that situation.
Randy, of those 15 that were detained, you said one is still being detained. Do you know what type of process the government subjected them to before they released them?
I can only assume that they checked their cell phones and their computers, and also any papers that they had as far as where they're from, who they were working for, and all of that. Because the one that has been deported, so he or she is no longer in Venezuela. So I don't know much more than that. I just got a sketchy report today from the Committee to Protect Journalists on this.
And Patricia, what are your sources saying about that, if anything?
About these 14 journalists?
Yes.
Yeah, they were detained on Monday. On Monday was the day in which the National Assembly have their first session, and in which Delcy Rodriguez jure as a president in charge of the country. And I know that these journalists were trying to cover in that information, and they were detained by the political security force that is very scared security force, because they usually, when they detain you, you are going directly to the torture center But fortunately, in this time, these 14 journalists were released at the end of the day. So,
Is
yeah.
there any feeling that there's going to be some type of free elections now that Maduro is gone? Or this is, of course, this is very early on. This is only 1 week after, and we don't know what the administration's plans are, except for we know that they are extracting oil
Yeah.
from Venezuela, which was apparently needed for the refineries in Louisiana because of the type of oil that the refineries are built for, the what they call the dirty crude is, and we are apparently we're having a slowdown in the dirty crude. So some people might suggest that this was a pure economic attack by the administration to help big oil companies get the type of crude where the refineries were, which are down in the Gulf of Mexico. I have yet to start calling it the Gulf of America, and I probably will never, but we're down in the Gulf of Mexico. What are your thoughts on that, about what the real reason was for this, or what some people suspect is the real reason for this? Didn't have to do with drugs, didn't have to do with bringing democracy, but it had to do with robbing this great resource that you have there in Venezuela.
In my opinion.
Yes, your opinion.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Well, I feel like definitely it's obvious that the Trump administration is trying to make a deal with these officials that remains in the country, like Delcy Rodriguez, that she and her brother are very, very radical. And for us in Venezuela, it's weird to see them following the instruction of Trump. So it's so weird. It's like we cannot rely on them. But apparently, the situation is like probably they made an agreement. Many people believe, and I one of them, that Delcy Rodriguez and her brother betrays Maduro and they facilitate the extraction of Maduro. And now they are trying to have a deal with Trump with the oil. But at the same time, we are, aware because we are thinking that probably if the autocracy or the democracy remains, but is benefiting the Trump government with the access to the oil industry, that will be a partnership, a business partnership, but the people in Venezuela really wants that this dictatorship ends one day.
Well, we're only speculating. I'm purely speculating, but the administration did say that it had an inside source within his administration that was keeping track of his whereabouts, which was able to allow them to do, some people have called it kidnapping, some people have called it extraction, or some people have said to bring him to justice. So there may be some truth to this thought that you're having. Randy, as it relates to going forward, what hope do you see for the press in Venezuela?
I guess we're going to have to wait and see. Right now, things are changing pretty rapidly every day. I think it's going to be years to see how this all plays out. So, I wish I had a crystal ball, but right now I'm going to have to say that we'll have to see. I mean, I think it's more about it's less about what people say they're going to do than what they actually do. And are they going to have free elections? Are they going to allow those elections to be covered by a free press? I mean, there's going to be a lot of changes that occurs in that country, and I'm not very optimistic if the same crowd who is currently in control right now is going to be in control in the long run.
Patricia, before this incident happened with the taking of Maduro and bringing him to the United States, Can you give me a sense of what Venezuelans thought of the United States and what regard they held the United States in?
Sure. Well, this is very curious because since President Trump started with these plans in the Caribbean with the warships, many Venezuelans start to see Trump like the last hope to Venezuela to finally get political change. So that sounds weird, but the reality was that many people believe that after we went to election, we did protests, we did everything to try to change the government and try to get the democracy again. But after the 2024 election, all that happening after that, when Trump says that he will do something about Venezuela, the Venezuelans start to feel like this will be the last hope, like Trump will help to restore the democracy. Of course, this is very controversial because we know the way in which the situation has been happening is far of the legal way. But at the same time, it's like the situation in Venezuela is very, very hard with the economical crisis, political crisis, all the human rights violations. So I can say that now that Maduro is no longer in the country, we have to think that this situation or the way in which the government, the Trump administration act cannot diminish the reality that Maduro is responsible for several crimes against humanity, several tortures, and several human rights violations. And we Venezuela hopes that he and the people of his government any day will, stay in accord, receiving, the judicial process that they need to face for the crimes. At the same time, let's see what happened now that United States is in this kind of political situation with Venezuela.
How is it being reported there in Venezuela? This is to both you and Randy, as to what happened, how it happened, and whether or not it was even legal for it to happen.
Well, it's kind of, I think that how it's being reported in Venezuela is probably a better question for Patricia because, all the reporting that I have seen has been really fairly mixed from people who are side with Maduro to those who don't. People have taken sides and press and radio, et cetera, sponsored by the government, largely is taking the signs that this was have taken sides and this is a kidnapping, whereas those who have a free hand in reporting, particularly those outside of the country, are reporting it much like Patricia has just spoken about it. This is a very complex situation too, because it involves Cuba, which is a main partner, essentially an oil partner, as is Iran and it's China and Russia. But Cuba, being so close to the United States, and has virtually their number one resource is Venezuela's oil, which they essentially take in and then sell at a higher price, and that has been running that economy. And if Venezuela is kind of on the edge, Cuba has got 1 foot in a humanitarian crisis or 2 feet in it right now. because they essentially have no revenue coming into that country now that the oil has been shut off.
What are your thoughts, Patricia? We're going to give you the final word on this.
Well, I feel like the coverage about the situation that is happening right now in Venezuela, we are seeing international media, of course, focusing in how this attack and this extraction was illegal. But at the same time, I hope that the media don't forget how cruel the government of Maduro has been so far, and how was the situation in Venezuela, how we can explain that the country with the main quantity of oil reserve became in a very poor country, in a collapse of their economy, the collapse of everything, and how this happened before the US applied economic sanctions. I mean, this whole situation in Venezuela has been consequence of a bad economical policies that we had during Chavez government and then during Maduro government. So it's a very complex situation. And I hope that the reports don't stay only showing like this is a problem about a left-leaning government with a right-leaning government. Is not simple than that. It's nothing about that. It's more complex than that.
Patricia, where can we find your reporting on this? Because you have such great sources that are still in Venezuela who unfortunately can't publish their own articles but have to feed you information. Where can people follow you, and how can, because I want to know what the people in Venezuela are saying and not just the American press. Where can we find articles that you're publishing?
Well, you can go to armando.info in Google. Just search for that. Digital media.
Spell that for me, please.
Yes, ARMANDO.info.
Okay.
And also you can follow some digital media in Venezuela, such as Efecto Cocuyo.
I'm not even going to ask you to spell that because
Yes.
guys were teaching me how to try to roll my tongue to say the R's when we were there, and I am not good at that.
Sure. And El Pitazo, Run Runes, and Tal Cual. So these are some of the digital media that we are, trying to provide all the more clear information in these moments. And we have.
We're going to put some of that information on with this, where people can find this information. And Randy, we're going to also put about Alfred Friendly also, so that listeners can find out what you're doing there with the Journalists in Exile program too.
Excellent. That sounds great.
Yes.
Yeah. Right.
So I want to thank you two for taking time out, because I know we did this on a quick basis because I wanted people to hear both sides of this issue, and the side coming from people on the ground in Venezuela, as well as people who have been exiled, like yourself, Patricia, for reporting on the Maduro government and what life is like now and what you're looking for going forward. I'm Joe Tucker. I'm president of the International Academy of Trial Lawyers. And thank you for listening to our podcast, The Rule of Law, The Academy Speaks. You guys take care.